Okay, thanks for everybody for coming along. This is our second meeting of the Industrial Hemp Tour that we're doing in 2022 in Tokoroa, and it's wonderful to have you here, and to our online viewers, welcome. And we're looking forward to being able to present to you a whole lot of information on industrial hemp. And, okay, so we have two other speakers apart from myself tonight. My name is Richard Barge. I'm the chair of the New Zealand Hemp Industries Association. And it's my privilege to come to Tokoroa and try and explain a whole lot of the benefits and potential and opportunities in the industrial hemp industry, because it's way underrated, but it's a very, very good news story. So the program for this evening, we'll start with a welcome, which we've just sort of done. I'll do an introduction on behalf of the NZHIA, talking about a little bit about the history of how we've got to where we are, and then we'll hear from James, and then we'll go over to Bill, and then I'll come back and I'll do a little bit of a wrap up around some of the business plans associated with the four areas of the hemp industry from the NZHIA's point of view, which are the farming, the food, the fibre, and the health industries. And then we'll have some questions and answers. So looking at the hemp in history, it's important for people to understand that we've been around for quite some time. The publication on the left was presented to all the MPs in 1998. So we were established as an incorporated society in 1997. And at the time when we were talking to the government, there was no way we could actually even have a conversation with them, because they had a moratorium in place that meant that they couldn't discuss cannabis. So we had to raise their awareness that industrial hemp wasn't the narcotic drug marijuana, it was low THC industrial hemp. And we did that by producing this document, the 5-minute guide, on the left of that presentation slide. That helped to raise the awareness to allow us to get the trials underway in 2000. We were working with a whole lot of other people in the industry as well that wanted these trials to happen. And those trials got underway, and by 2005, the government had considered that the trials were successful in showing that there was no risk of plant loss and diversion into the illicit market from our crops. So from that point, they announced the 2006 Industrial Hemp Regulations under the Misuse of Drugs Act. Our regulations sit under the Misuse of Drugs Act. So the publication on the right is actually an investment report that we did in 2021. And again, that was with some AgMart funding that we had Dr. Nick Marsh produce a document that explained some of the realities around what the potential of the industry was. And there's a great graphic in there that shows the fibre and seed industry could be up to sort of $500 million by 2030. But if we factor in the nutraceutical or the health industry on top of that, it could be a $2 billion proposal by 2030. So we were quite pleased, and I show those as two distinct things to show that there's been a bit of history of industrial hemp in New Zealand since the mid to late 90s. We're talking about industrial hemp. Now, I've mentioned low THC a number of times. The reason why we've allowed to grow under our hemp regulations is that we can grow a crop that's 0.35% or less THC. There's quite a lot of conversations around whether the crop is actually broken down into sativa, indica, and rudularis, which we have shown here. You can see, obviously, on the left-hand side of that screen, the tall, long sativa-type plants. You can see that they would be quite highly valued as a fibre, whereas a shorter, broader leaf version, the indica version, you could see as a seed crop and a little bit easier to harvest at that height. We've got two experts in farming here tonight, so I'll leave a lot of the farming questions to those guys, and then we'll fill in the blanks in our Q&A session. So it's an interesting one about this whole taxonomy of cannabis. It's still a very open sort of topic, because a lot is being learnt as we go along as well. And 90 years of prohibition means that not a lot of work's been done in some of these areas, which is quite an opportunity for a country like New Zealand. But if we go back and have a look at the history, which is always interesting to do to put it into a little bit of context, the boat on the left, it represents, an image of how useful industrial hemp was back in the days when seafaring was done with wind. Because those sort of boats would have carried 50 or 60 tonnes of hemp on board, and that could have been in their sails, obviously in their rope and cordage and the caulking and to hold the hull together, but also in the uniforms they used, the paper that they wrote on and the parchments and for their maps and things, and the oils and things in their pens. All of those would have been based on industrial hemp seed and fibre. And the picture on the right speaks to that cordage. And there's some examples in the room tonight, and I hope you have a good look around some of the products, because there's some quite amazing examples of how hemp is used in the world these days. If we go from the fibre side, which was where we were talking about with the canvas and the ropes, then we look at the health side. And this slide's important for people to consider, because up until the late 1800s, early 1900s, the American Pharmacopoeia, for example, the book of medicines that the Americans used, all the doctors there, cannabis preparations were very, very popular at the time. And you'll probably be able to see from the slide some of the brand names that we have: Park Davis, Ella Lilly. These companies are still there, and they were making these products in the 1800s because they were of use. So the usefulness as a health or a medicine, in this case a medical product, has been well known for a very long time, and it's been acted upon in that time. The next slide now speaks to why we talk about the billion-dollar opportunity. The slide in the middle is a extract from the Popular Mechanics magazine in 1938. So they're talking about, in 1938, they're talking about an industry that could have $1 billion potential, and that article is all about the decortication process, which is the splitting. The decortication is the splitting of the fibre into the long bast, secondary and primary bast fibres, and this inner woody pith, the herb, which we'll talk about when we get to those sort of slides later on in the presentation. But that was a very manual process that used to have to be done, which was a lot of hard work. And George W. Sitland, who in 1917 developed this mechanical process, was celebrated in 1938 as creating the equivalent of the cotton gin for the hemp industry. He mechanicalized everything to do with the processing. So it was a massive breakthrough. And when people talk about 25,000 uses for industrial hemp, this was the article it came from in 1938, when they said 25,000 uses, everything from cellophane to dynamite. So quite a range in there. The publication on the left is Bulletin 404, which talks about hemp herds as a paper-making product. And that's where the quote that hemp grows 4 times as much biomass as a tree in a similar growth period. That's where it comes from. So these are historically documented, the Bulletin 404, that's the United States Department of Agriculture, and the Popular Mechanics article. So it speaks to everybody's sort of, to speak to some of that history that we've got, and especially in that fibre. Now, in 1938, when we were celebrating the potential of $1 billion industry based on the fibre, let alone the seed for bird seed and oil manufacture and things like that. Sorry, I'll just hold that thought for a moment. At the same time, around the late 1800s and the early 1900s, they were studying using agricultural raw materials to make plastics and composite materials. And that science was called commergy, and that was developed by Henry Ford, the chap on the right rather, and George Washington Carver at the time. And they were making products that really spoke to the use of the constructive uses of these agricultural raw materials. The photo by Henry Ford on the right is, he's swinging a sledgehammer at his car, and in the video that you can watch online, if you search for Henry Ford's plastic car, you can see the panel bouncing back. Now, he was a soya farmer as well as a hemp farmer, so that panel was probably made of a lot of agricultural materials, but hemp would have definitely been part of it. And, of course, you had the diesel motor that was designed by Randolph Diesel to run on vegetable oils, as well as the fossil fuels that were just coming online at the time. But this speaks to the fact that they were making these plastic and composite materials, a century ago. So I'm sure that we could be doing a similar thing these days. Now, unfortunately, in 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act came into force. So this was based on the marijuana, which is a Mexican slang word for cannabis, and they taxed it out of existence. So without the American Medical Association, understanding that marijuana was, by removing marijuana, you would also remove access to hemp as a medicine. And without the birdseed industry losing access to seed and the fibre people, they all lost it overnight because it was misclassified as marijuana, which, in a sense, is quite a racist sort of a comment. And that's where the people say, the law against prohibition against marijuana is, racist legislation. But it was the Marijuana Tax Act, and if you wanted to produce marijuana, you had to get a producer certificate, which is the image on the right. And eventually that went out of the door because no one could afford to do everything. So marijuana was off the menu and hemp went with it. And then, of course, you had all the prohibition people that were now out of a job because alcohol was now legal in the States. They all got involved in this anti-marijuana, anti-psychotropic drug endeavour, and that's where we heard the term reefer madness coming in. And reefer madness then spread throughout the world by people like Harry Anslinger and the head of the people that were running this anti-prohibition, and we ended up taking it all the way to the UN. Now, it's interesting timing because in 1937, DuPont patented nylon, Hearst patented the way that they could make paper from trees, and all these sort of things happened at the same time. So we pivoted from vegetables and plant materials to that fossil fuels. But that does explain why we've had this sort of set of prejudice, and we've got a real brand issue with industrial hemp because of our connection via the word cannabis to marijuana. In 1944, we had a massive change of heart because now they were involved in the war. And the image on the left, Hemp for Victory, which was a newsreel that was run in front of all the movies that people went to see during that time, was all about encouraging every patriotic farmer to grow an acre of hemp. And they needed that because they were in need of cordage and fibre for their webbing, for their uniforms, for their ropes and other things that were involved in the war effort. So at that time, the prohibition went away. They bought in a whole load of seeds, which are protected by these two gentlemen in military uniforms, and they were distributed throughout America to, as I say, every patriotic farmer. The Germans, who did exactly the same thing, that's their primer on the right-hand side. It's Hanf is German for hemp, and they had a male and a female cartoon character representing the two types of the plant, and they had the same message. We need you to grow so we can get the cordage and the fibre. So when they were requiring it, it was quite happy to reinstate that as a product that industry could use. And of course, after the war, it was back to the prohibition, which leads us to 1961, when it finally, the worldwide movement around this reefer madness finally got to the UN. And the UN Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs in 1961, that's when worldwide marijuana was prohibited. But even at that time, they acknowledged industrial hemp. Now, it's very important that this occurred because Article 28.2 of the UN Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs says to us in Section 2, this convention shall not apply to the cultivation of the cannabis plant exclusively for industrial purposes, fibre and seed, or horticultural purposes. So they were acknowledging that there was a number of countries around the world that were using low THC industrial hemp as a fibre, as a seed. It was part of their industry, and that needed to be protected. So that gives us the foundations upon which our hemp regulations are based, because there's no reason why we have to be affected as a drug crop when we're industrial hemp, which again is that low THC product. So when we jump to our industrial hemp regulations that were set up in 2006, I'm only going to put up one slide. There's a number of slides that we could talk about hemp products and low THC and things like that, but really it's about the objective, because that's the key from us as the industry's point of view, because we feel that if the regulator was really regulating us in accordance with the objective, our hemp industry would have gone a lot further, a lot faster. So we do have regulatory issues that we'll touch upon in some of the presentations this evening. But from the objective point of view, it's about enabling the cultivation and distribution of industrial hemp under a licensing regime, so the regulations issue the licenses, that ensures that other forms of cannabis are not cultivated and distributed under the guise of industrial hemp. So all they're worried about is high THC products being passed off as industrial hemp. But really what they're doing is creating a situation whereby they can issue a license for us to grow, and we can grow low THC industrial hemp, and we can make that into hemp products which don't require a license, and we should have an industry going from there. And that's in that food, fibre and health sectors. Just to touch on we talked about the fibre and the boats and things like that, just to talk about some of the seed products. Here's some examples of some New Zealand-made products. And there's a lot more going on because of the law change that happened in 2018, which allowed us access to the hemp food market for humans. Unfortunately, at the same time, we lost access to the hemp market for animals, which is an ongoing issue that the industry faces. But the food market for humans did open up a massive opportunity, and that was reflected in the scaling up of the industry in 2019, 2021. To go back to the fibre now, these are sort of modern uses, and we're looking at a Class C Mercedes on the left, a Lotus. Now we're talking about using fibre in the Lotus on the right. The whole body was made of it. On the left, it's more so the interior door panels and things like that. Now, the reason why Mercedes are looking at this is they're a European company, and they have to consider end-of-life cycles. So how do they recycle their products? And so hemp really fits in because it's recyclable, but also it's lighter than some of the products that they were using in the past, and acoustically it works very well. The photo on the bottom right is a hempcrete house being built in New Plymouth, and that speaks to the construction uses, and we'll touch on those as we go through as well. But it's very exciting, that aspect of the construction, because it could really help the industry scale. The photo on the left just gives you some idea about those bass fibres we were talking about, and the hurd and some insulation material. So just going through a little bit of the value chain there. This slide would I sit on for a wee while. That's the back page of the 5-minute guide, and it's one of those slides that explains how the whole plant can be used. And this is an important aspect for the New Zealand hemp industry, because we're all about that circular economy where there is no waste. And we really are interested in full plant utilisation, because the economics of the plant stack up better if the farmer and the primary processor can have access to all of those markets for those raw materials and ingredients. Another slide in a similar vein explaining the uses. These slides will be part of the presentation that we'll send out after the event, so you'll be able to see them at your leisure. So for us, we're here to say to you guys in the audience, which, we need industry people. We need people from the food, fibre and health sectors, whether that be in construction materials or in the food ingredient businesses or the food manufacturers, to hear some facts about hemp that answer the question why they should incorporate it in their business plans. And for example, if you were a medical device manufacturer, and you had a filter in your device, and we said to you that the hemp fibre is naturally antifungal, antibacterial, antistatic, antimicrobial, stops 95% of the UV light, you might be thinking, wow, that's the type of fibre that I need in my medical device. That's the type of fibre I need on the sheets in my hospital, because they would wear longer and last longer and have those antibacterial properties. This is why we need those industry people in the room to create that market demand. Because at the end of the day, we can grow it, but there's not a farmer out there that's not asking me two questions. How much am I going to make, and who am I going to sell it to? And we need to answer those questions. So we need industry to help us scale with it. We need industry to be part of this journey, because they're the ones that are going to help explain what specification they want in their hemp seed, oil, or fibre for their construction materials, that sort of thing. With that specification, we can go backwards through the value chain to identify how we have to process it, how we have to harvest it. And that also goes back to how we have to breed the seeds that work in that environment. So that's bringing up the why question. And we'll go through these things after the two presenters and explain a little bit more about those 3 or 4 parts of the industry: the farming, the food, the fibre and the health. But for the moment, we're just going to go back to the speakers because I'm going to transition and I'm going to ask Bill James to come up and talk to us about his experiences with industrial hemp. Thank you, James.
Kia ora, everyone. I think I've met most of you tonight. Just like to thank Richard for inviting me along tonight and having a bit of a chat. I'm certainly no expert on hemp, but we've made a pretty good fist of getting involved and growing hemp in our farming system near Tito, nearby. So my day job is running sheep and beef and dairy farming systems around that area, around Tokoroa and Mamaku. And we were just looking to diversify our system. We've always had a bit of a sustainability bent in our business and keen to explore different ways of doing things. And so we sort of started looking into it right about just after the legislation change for human consumption in New Zealand. So around that 2018, 2019. And at that time, we started doing a lot of research, and I think probably talked to just about everyone who had anything to do with hemp in New Zealand. And we heard of a lot of people that had a lot of failures in growing the crop or trying to harvest the crop or getting absolutely savaged by birds and losing their crop. And so, yeah, it sounded like a really kind of risky, expensive sort of thing to get involved. So we thought, yeah, that sounds good. Let's give that a crack. And the first issue we came across to explain this picture behind me was getting hold of the seed. And because that legislation has just changes, everyone was trying to get their hands on some seed to give this hemp thing a go, from what I understand. And no one could guarantee us seed, and we had to get our license, and we had to organise all these things that people had found as big obstacles, like harvester and how you're going to get it dried and all these sorts of things. And so we couldn't get the seed, then all that sort of work was pointless. So we ended up going overseas and went to Australia and talked to some people at a place called Australian Primary Hemp and in Melbourne, and had a chat with them, and they said, oh, you want to grow hemp? You're crazy. Yep, like us. So they put us in touch with Jace and Anita from Fanola, who've been in the hemp industry for something like 30 years or something now. And we were lucky enough to be able to import Fanola seed. And that's me finally getting the seed back to my place in the back of a dodgy looking truck, like I've just run over the border. And yeah, with the plant of the drill booked for the following day, because we had some real troubles getting it through the process of importation with all the obvious legislation challenges between different countries and through ports and such. So it was a mammoth effort, but we got there. And so from a farming perspective, like hemp's, there's so much potential with hemp, and but there's a lot of hype around it, understandably and justifiably. But it is just a plant, and it needs a good seed bed to grow in. What we've found, a fine seed bed, and it needs fertilizer, it needs water, and yeah. So we were growing it predominantly for food, by the way. Sorry. So this is the emergence of our first crop in 2019. It has, yeah, so we're day 9, and this is Fanola. It's a low growing one. Day 16 and day 27, starting to get pretty excited. And then in some of our paddocks, we started noticing some serious weed issues coming up alongside the hemp. And after a while, through trial and error, we found out kind of why that happens and how we can try and limit it. But especially in the Waikato where we are here, like, weeds are a massive issue with growing hemp, because the contracts that we had for the people that we're supplying it to did not permit us to use any herbicides and stuff once we'd actually got it in the ground. So so it was all about preparation and agronomy, and trying to prepare that soil whilst disturbing it the least, but still get that fine seed bed. But we had some really good crops in some paddocks that were nice and weed free. And we sort of got into the harvesting aspect. We actually, because one of the big challenges we'd talk to with people was actually finding someone who's going to come and harvest your hemp, because it's a tough plant and it will eat machinery for breakfast. But if you get the right cultivar at the right size and do your homework, it's totally doable. And so we were lucky to sort of get that advice early on and put in the mahi and talk to as many people as we can to try and get a cultivar that suited what we wanted to do for food. And we managed to pull it off somehow. So it worked well, and we got some really, really good yields out of some of those paddocks in the first year. I'm not going to lie, some of them were a bit of a disaster, and that made our average be about average for New Zealand. But we got some really good results as well, which was super promising. And then so the next aspect was, once we get it to that stage, right, and we did a trial harvest. First time I've driven a combine harvester. Luckily, a local guy, Peter Carl, who has a lot of experience, he helped us out step by step with that, and getting that sorted. And then we did a bit of a trial run and got it back to our garage floor and said, right, we've got to dry this. Luckily, in advance, we'd once again done the investigation into drying and worked with a local drying contractor in Taupiri. So we had trucks at the ready, the dryer ready to go. We had to get it from the farm to the dryer within 2 hours, basically. So we had to be pretty sharp and organised and ready to roll. But this is actually, I mentioned Jason and Nita, this is Jace Galloway from, originally from the States, but now they live in Finland. And so he came all the way out to New Zealand for our first crop of finola, which was pretty cool. And sat on our garage floor, helping us plan the next steps. And we actually ran a field day on our farm. And there's this fella here giving a talk way back then. And we had a bunch of farmers around. It was good hui. So yeah, harvesting into the trucks. One of the challenges we found was some blockages in the harvester after a while. So with like just a gumminess kind of product that sort of consolidates within the throat of the harvester. And which just meant constant maintenance, cleaning after each day's harvesting, so on and so forth. So yeah, that was a good site. Big bin full of hemp seed. And so this is the dryer that we're using with the drying contractors in Taupiri with Gavin's, and they put it through what's called a batch dryer, which is on one of those sheets, I think, on that back table. And we managed to get it down to the specified moisture content, low and slow. You've got to be really careful with drying the seed, but that process has to get underway immediately. and then bagged up, ready to go to the people that we had organised to purchase it. In that first year, with the cleaner crops, and by clean I mean weed-free crops, we baled some of the fibre. Even though it was a shorter variety, we baled that up, and we did some trials with animal bedding and sheep milking and goat milking barns around the Waikato, and with positive results. My wife, who's a chef, also has done a lot of research into cooking with hemp, and we really enjoyed it as a product. And yeah, there's a lot of interest in it. We sort of played around with the idea of being able to sort of vertically integrate and start selling our own sort of product. And to be brutally honest, we've just got too much on the go. And so we left it with, as a contract grower, us as contract growers, and leaving others to do the marketing at this stage. But believe it's a wonderful food product. So into our second season, unfortunately, COVID hit, and shipping and, well, as you know, shipping just became ridiculously hard, and we had such a hard time just getting it here in the first place without those restrictions. We decided to play it safe, and by that time it was a bit easier to source seed within New Zealand. So we tried a range of different cultivars. We took it as an opportunity to see what else is out there, and some of it we got really right. Like this crop here, we got it at the height where it was beating the weeds. It was yielding fantastically. If you were to take it off those hectares, it was a super profitable crop. And it wasn't too much not too much height so that we could handle it with the harvester. However, we did have some crops that did get out of control. Despite the research that we'd done and trying to limit fertilisation and delaying the planting time, we grew immense forests of the stuff, and it was just too much for our harvester, and we had to sort of walk away. This particular paddock, we had to walk away halfway through because it was just going to cause too many issues with the equipment, which led to an interesting composting mission. And this is some of the fibre that will build up within the inner workings of your harvester. And once again, it just requires constant maintenance and cleaning out. So those little fibres will just wind around anything like fishing line. A few other modifications we did working with our drying contractor was to set up false floors in the trucks. And so we had air flowing through the base of the truck to start that drying process, or more to not let that seed start heating up while it's sitting in the truck for those 2 hours before it gets to the drying facility, which worked really well. And then you do have this residue, especially in those paddocks which are not weed free. So, we didn't feel comfortable baling this stuff if there was going to be a whole lot of foreign weed material in there. So we ended up using the good old Gallagher suck and chuck, and once again created sort of a few compost piles, but actually worked really effectively in cleaning up those paddocks ready for autumn grass. Yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. The cultivars that we had the most success with, which fitted into our farming system, were Finola and some of the CFX varieties, which we were planting in sort of mid-November and then harvesting around the 1st of February. So super quick turnaround, which meant we could get back into grass for look after our livestock. That's got it.
Thank you, James, for taking us through a bit of a dive on your experiences as a first-year grower and some phenomenal yields you had in those high-yielding paddocks. So what would you say is non-target sort of a yield for a grower? A tonne would be a nice target to start with per hectare?
Yeah, tonne's good.
Right. So start thinking about that with the farmers out there. So we'll ask Bill to come up now and share his wisdom around a little bit more about the farming, but also some marketing aspects of industrial hemp.
A little bit of background to where I come from. I've been involved in the organic industry since 1985 or thereabouts, in agriculture and agricultural politics all my life. My introduction into the hemp side of things was from an organic dairy farming perspective, where we were growing the organic dairy sector in New Zealand, and we were worried about the food source to replace palm kernel, etc. And we needed a high protein filler that could bulk out grains, etc. The ideal thing is hemp seed cake. The only problem is we're not allowed to feed it to animals. But by the time I'd made the general inquiries, I'd been drawn into the network of the hemp industry. And so then Dave Jordan, Hemp Farm New Zealand, some of the other processors, medical and industrial, were seeking organic land, clean land, to grow the crops on because it's an accumulator crop. And so we started finding pieces of land that were perceived as clean, being certified organic or not organic, but could be organic, not having had herbicides, fungicides for quite a number of years. And so that's where I got dragged in. We grew some up the dead end of Tapawahini Road in Tamaranui on some fairly marginal harvesting country for a combine, especially the combine we had, which was an old rickety thing because it was the development phase. We did 33 acres up the top of the Kaimais. And again, some issues up there with having to develop some strategies. And I fully respect, James, what you're talking about with the clogging. We had a little short guy that spent more time up inside the combine unravelling. And then you look at some of the Canadian and international experience and some of the innovative ways that they've removed those obstacles in the crop. And just a fun fact, the research shows in New Zealand that the hemp we grow in New Zealand is 25% stronger than the next strongest natural fibre. And that is amazing. 25% stronger. But we can also put it through a 3D printer. So we've got products that we can develop and put through a 3D printer and take those properties forward. So that's where my involvement first came in, and then we grew from there to finding and assisting companies like Hemp Farm New Zealand with bigger contracts, Landcorp, for instance, Pamu Farms, finding land and helping negotiate the deals with them for growing, working with guys in the Manawatu, speaking to farmers down there about some of the technologies, whether they were organic or not. One of the things we do find is that there's a resistance to a lot of these opportunities and the differences in production. And so in the Wairarapa, the hemp industry was showing great potential for the simple reason that they weren't allowed to grow peas. They're croppers, they've got all the infrastructure, but because of the pea weevil, they weren't allowed to grow peas for a set number of years. And so that was a great opportunity to go in with people with machinery, the right size tractors, cultivation gear, the knowledge, the hop on a tractor and know what they're doing to get the seed bed that you're referring to. So those sorts of things have had me in and out of the industry for many years. More recently, I've been doing a bit of work with hemp seed cake, and I'll talk about that as we work through the slides. So opportunities and difference in production and marketing of iHemp. And up there, you can see some tall hemp at the base, and then hemp seed, hemp oil, and the hemp seed cake. So that photo there just gives you an idea. That's a slightly before maturity. You can see the fence there. That isn't a dwarf fence. That is a standard fence. And it was very easy to get lost in that crop. And of course, when you've got a crop that high and with that long a fibre, once you start winding around something going round and round in a combine, you end up with a piece of rope fairly soon. And it gets in behind the bearing houses. And so you've got to start looking at those things and saying, altering machinery. And this is one of the big opportunities that we've got to look at, is what suits the harvesting. What innovations do we have to bring into the harvesting? Do we look overseas to some of the innovation there? Dave Jordan ended up bringing in a machine in from Russia. Now that was a bit of a mission in itself, and it never really served the purpose here, but it was part of that journey of innovation. And this is a big bit of what we've got to actually think about and look at in this forward progress. The technologies. Mention's been made of the bird problem. Man, you should have seen the birds in this crop. Once the birds get a taste for it, they've got a taste for it, and they'll come back and back and back. And we do have answers for that. There's two simple ones that we can use in the industry, but a lot of people in the industry are stuck in traditional. And so laser beams are something that's been mastered for a lot of, the crops where you can set lasers and they will upset. But there's an even easier one, which is a proven spray. BD Max put it out. It's been through the horticultural trials and is used in the grape industry. It's used in stadiums to scare birds away from that specific area. It doesn't kill them, it just deters them. The only problem is, most of the producers don't want to spend $1 until they have to, until the need is there. Most of the good preventative stuff, you've got to start before you need it. You've got to start before they get a taste. It's very hard to stop the birds once they know that that is good tucker, seriously good tucker. And this is some of the stuff that we've got to learn and take those early steps. Okay, the range of products that we look at, and this is part of the opportunity of that we've got to look at. Where are we going? What's our destination? And if we don't know what our destination is, we're going to have a real problem in designing what we're going to do. Am I growing to sell at the farmer's market, or am I going to be part of a bigger operation? Am I going to be a part of a cooperative, or am I going to look after me? I'm going to press it, I'm going to get every last dollar, and everyone else in the industry is my competition. This is part of the opportunity we've got to look at. And we've got to say, how is the industry going to best go forward and best serve the majority of the people? There's always room for people to be in their own space and do their own thing and their own branding and all the rest. But as James pointed out, he's already busy enough being a farmer. Marketing is a specialist job. Marketing is where you make or break a business. Growing stuff, that's easy. I was organic market gardening. I've lectured in organic market gardening and market gardening per se. Knowing your market. It is no good growing a 5 kilo pumpkin for the granny flats. They only want a little half kilo job. It's no good growing a particular kumara for Rotorua because they're very fussy. It's no good growing a hemp crop that doesn't meet the process of the harvesting, those aspects, or your destination. So before you start, think very much who are your partners and what's your destination. If your destination is doing hemp hearts and hemp proteins and other protein mix there, two sorts of proteins and some oils and bits and pieces, that's a lot of marketing. You've got lots of products, you've got lots of infrastructure, you've got stock take. Be very aware of that. Okay, branding and marketing. Boy, marketing. Whew. I've worked with companies that in the international thing, we were 2 years away with a milk powder from getting the product to market. They handed me the tin one day and I thought, holy hell, they've already cracked it. No, these were marketing gurus. They were wrapped with the tin. I couldn't believe it. I'm interested in what's in the tin because I'm interested in food. They were interested in the presentation. It didn't matter a shit about the food, what was in the tin. Take a look next time you go through the supermarket at the branding. And this is something the organic sector, the hemp sector really needs, and the organic sector really need to look at, is this branding, the image, the connotations, what we're doing, and how we market collectively the good story. And this is an opportunity, and it doesn't just involve farmers. It involves the marketers, the people it can challenge. This is part of the image. This is a real neat place, Nimbin, in the hinterland in from Byron Bay. Okay, it's Hippieville, man. It is Hippieville. Okay, they still have drug street fights regularly there. It is somewhere to go for an experience. But as the sign says, Nimbin, Hemp Embassy, we're not criminals. Well, most of them in town probably are. But that is an image that the hemp industry, the industrial hemp industry, has to fight. And that's something that Richard touched on before, that we've got to be very aware of that aspect of industry connotation. Where do you fit? We still get the standing jokes, wacky backy, and all these sorts of things. We've got to be very clear on that presentation of an industry. This hemp cake that we've got on your tables, you're not going to get high on it, guys. It's food. So let's be very clear on that. And we've got to present that. And this is part of the opportunity or the challenge of marketing, because we don't have to create that image. That is the image. We have to change that image. And this is something the organic industry has been struggling with for a long time, because we've got a lot of people in the organic sector that still want it to be cottage industry, still want it to be, a few marks on it don't matter. That's the proof mark that it's organic. But at the same time, we got the guys that are doing excellent jobs at large scale. But a whole lot of people in the leadership want it to remain in a cottage industry. And that's a very big challenge. And that's something the hemp industry has to really look at. Are we going to be a whole lot of little people doing little things going nowhere? And once I collapse, the industry collapses, or are we going to get together and drive something forward? So be aware of some of those issues. Okay, this one's the three main food products. And as I said, my main interest, I've got people I talk to that are involved in the flower sector and things, and they keep asking me questions. I only got one question. Can you eat it? If I can't eat it, I'm not interested. I'm a grower of food. And I think I could say I know, because it's pretty common knowledge, that over the next 2 years, the world has a pretty big problem with food security. And so the food we have, we've got to utilise and we've got to make the most of. And this is a huge opportunity if we're doing the job right. We don't want to just do food, we need to do it right. Okay, again, looking at the product range there, we can do a whole lot of little bits. We can package up. We can go for high value, individual high value. The balance of high value, and I do this a fair bit when I'm talking to groups, and it's balance. High value most often represents low volume. Over the past 6 months, I've got rid of 100 tonne of hemp cake, hemp seed cake. It was going to landfill. I've put it into productive use. That is a waste of 100 tonne of food resource, of high value resource. So we'll have a look at that a bit later on. Okay, this stuff here, this is interesting. And can I go back? I can't go back? I can. So this stuff, yeah, but I'm not looking at that too. Trying to keep them both, So this stuff is interesting because that's a pelletized what? Now, there's a very good international market for the leaf, for the fines in the harvesting process. And so the harvesting that we did down in Fielding was really interesting because the guy's a cocky. He's involved in the grain industry, a couple of 1,000 acres. And the harvester, we had a few problems with the brand new harvester, but on behind it, we had a trolley, a old potato bin carrier, and we had a conveyor belt set up to catch all the leaves and the fines as they came out the back of the chute and put them into bins and take them away and dry them. That's the product there, light and fluffy. And even putting it in something like a wool press still wouldn't make it really viable to freight it. I'm sorry, Auckland, I've just gone backwards. So I hope you can keep up with that. So by condensing it into a very compact pallet, it meant it was going to be viable to ship to the UK to a purchaser who wanted it. Now, part of the legislation stuff says, no, you can't do that because you're shipping a leaf that's high in certain aspects. And so that project never went anywhere. But the opportunity was still that we were able to show we could palletize it to really condense it so that you have got a bushel weight ratio that is transportable. Because otherwise you're going to take up a ship with very little load and there's no economy in that. So these are the sorts of destination things that we've got to look at. Also, that's got the potential to be a very good animal feed, but we're not allowed to feed it to animals. And so that becomes a real issue. So that's the fibre and that, or some of the lights, and that can be used for multiple things. We've got the hemp board, and this is from Nimbin. They've got quite a good display there. If you do get a chance, it's a great place to go to find out a lot of the history of a broad spectrum of the uses and applications of industrial hemp, medical hemp, and recreational hemp. So we've got those three categories. They cover all three. I think the bulk one would be the R, the middle one would be the M, and the lightest use one would be the industrial. But they do have it all there. And that board's got great potential in the building industry to replace particle board particularly, but any number of uses. Okay, so one of the big questions we've got to look at in the New Zealand scenario, and this know your destination, is are we looking at volume versus value? So if we take a look there, we can see, or we can't see very clearly, but Canada's got 137,000 acres of hemp, industrial hemp. We're at about 800 at the moment. Okay? Do we want to be in a scrap on bulk commodity? And this is something we've got to think about right early in the piece. They're growing it in a grain growing zone where it's hot and dry and arid. So they don't have the weed problems of the South Waikato. We've got to think about some of those things and how we compete and what is the difference in the product that we are taking forward. If we don't understand what the competition is, we're going to get sunk. We've got to know that before we start, not go into the scrap with them because they'll always be cheaper than us. The industrial model will always be cheaper. No different to some of you involved in the dairy industry here. We're industrial dairy. We can land dairy cheaper anywhere in the world than anywhere in the world can produce it there. These guys are industrial croppers. They can land hemp or canola or wheat or barley anywhere in the world cheaper than we can grow it here. We've got to be aware of that. So we've got to decide, are we in the volume game or the value game? And that's something this country has to decide. We look at things like Fit for the Future program, which we'll look at in a minute. New Zealand's agricultural push forward. That's really interesting because we're still talking about 2% growth. The dairy industry went through a period where we were 4% growth in volume, not in value, in volume. Well, didn't work. We're paying the price for it still. We can break down the individual countries. You can't see it very well there, but the top one's France, and we go right down to, we're sitting down about the same as, I think it was Latvia, But hopefully you can, if this is available, certainly the website's there. You can go in and get this information off the website. So I apologise about those two graphics. Okay, traceability, that's bankable. That's what I'm interested in. That's what I've been interested in since 1985, when I've been involved in agriculture for particular reasons. We went organic, and it's traceability that's bankable. And this is becoming a real challenge. So normally this one dribbles down if it's a proper PowerPoint, but it's not doing it today. Certified organic carbon farming for decades. Now, that's been a growing market internationally for the last 3 decades, and it's not slowing down. Okay? It is independently third-party certified, so you have integrity. It is very clear about the rules and it's understood. It's high value. Internationally, Europe and America are legislating, putting in programs to encourage farmers. The USA has just allocated $330 million to assist farmers go organic. They've set targets in their agricultural policy for organic growth because they are looking at the future. Some of that stuff is tied to health because that's the only justifiable budgetary reason a government can go down that path. The health budget is crippling the world's economies. But what we've got to look at is the piggybackers. So we've got beyond organics with an X there on the left. They can still use synthetic chemicals and use urea and DAP and all sorts. They're beyond organic. Well, how? They're not even organic. But that's a marketing thing that people are using. Another beyond organics. And that's a New Zealand company, and that was for products that they couldn't get organic certification on. But the marketing is beyond organic. Then we've got the ones that didn't even get started, Eco 98, the classic quote out of Eco 98. We don't have to change anything we're doing. We just have to tell the story better. I'd rather we told a better story. I'd rather we added the value that we sold to the top value markets in the world, not the commodity markets, even in the dairy industry. So we look at some of the certifications and marketing that we've currently got. You want to buy some good feed? It was growing at 143 kilos a day, dry matter a day, when it was, cranking along there. Yep, Roundup sprayed, glyphosate sprayed. Now, where does that fit into the system? Well, we can market it as conventional, definitely. We can market it as regen ag. We can't market it as organic. Perception is reality in the marketplace. And that's a quote from Peter Cullinane, who set up Lewis Road. He was Saatchi & Saatchi CEO worldwide. Okay, he knows the stuff. Perception is reality in the marketplace. This is the first time I've shown these slides because I don't want them getting in the hands, arguably, of some particular groups in New Zealand that want to shut down agriculture, livestock systems. But we've got to actually grip reality going forward. We are feeding Roundup sprayed pastures to stock and in the system. And we are now marketing and advocating that. This is glyphosate sprayed pasture cultivation for crop, spray free. Yes, it can be certified spray free. We are currently harvesting crops in the South Island that are certified and marketed as spray free because they use a herbicide instead of cultivation, or as well as cultivation, as in this case. But it's spray free because once it germinates, we don't spray it. Now, that's a perception thing. Spray free, is that spray free or isn't it spray free? Because the consumer thinks that spray free means you didn't use any of these things. So be very aware of some of these marketing ploys. What do we got here? Oh, dairy cows in milk, in milk grazing, glyphosate. Is it okay conventional? Yes. Is it okay certified pasture fed? Yes. Is it okay regen ag? Yes. Is it organic? No. And perception is reality in the marketplace. That particular photo is taken on State Highway 2 in the middle of the Hauraki Plains, where we have all the tourists coming from Auckland Airport down to the tourist spots. Okay, Christmas lamb, anyone? The ewes grazing in a Roundup sprayed paddock with suckling lambs. Where are those lambs going to be? Somebody's Christmas dinner. This is value and volume discussion. This is something we've got to really get a grip with. Is it conventional? Yes. Is it regen ag? Yes. Is it okay as pasture fed? Yes. Is it organic? No. Okay, so why are we hitting this? Because marketing, telling the better story, is something that we're now doing a hell of a lot of. And this is a program that now has 8,000 farmers signed up to market New Zealand produce as clean and green and trace origin. As long as you're complying with the agricultural laws of New Zealand, you comply with the certification. The government's program Fit for a Better World has the word glyphosate in it in the case study. It doesn't have the word organic in it anywhere. It's sending the wrong message. The same month that came out, Europe said they wanted 25% of all agricultural food ground certified organic by 2030. And that's our fit for the future. We've got to take this seriously as a nation. This is a organic maize crop in Northland. So yes, crops do need fertiliser or nourishment. It's how we get the nourishment into them. There's nothing wrong with that as a maize crop. You can see a group of people standing there. It's not a trick photography. We've got plenty of organic, fully certified organic crops that are producing equal to the high input conventional. One of the big questions we're going to ask ourselves in the industry is, are we going to be industrial or are we going to be cottage industry? So you can look at that photo there. Look at the amount of bags. That's only a fraction of it. Look at the size of the warehouse, the oil pressing machinery, the dehullers, the industry that's there. Now, these guys have the opportunity of doing the job at a commercial level, but they're in competition with people doing a lot of smaller stuff. That's something we've got to look at, because if we're going to do hemp for the New Zealand market, we've already got enough, thanks. Quite seriously, because we're only a small population. We export. We're an exporting nation. We've got to really focus on that and focus on the high value, where we can get high value. Are we going into the high packaging, where we move very small volumes at high prices? Because oftentimes packaging is more expensive than the product in the package. Or do we go into bulk bin scenarios at high value end, so the organic, the food quality end? Think about those things before you start. This one, I had problems sending my link through, but this one actually shows as a video, or it should do, but it's not going to here. I'm sure it's not. I'll just press the button again. No, it doesn't. So that's the sort of gear, but that's going into that crop that we looked at before. So the header's having to harvest at this height, not down here. And so adapting machinery is fairly important. And that crop was successfully harvested, the whole lot of it. And in the video, you would have seen the stuff coming out the back, the fibre. We've got the Waikato low crop. Okay, now, even at that stage, we can still see down to the ground level. This is at James's place. And so that's why we get the weeds. So one of the things we do in the technologies in organic agriculture, something real simple, we see it quite common now in general agriculture. Maize rows are no longer draft horse arse width wide. They are now down to 15 inch. And that gets rid of your weed because you get the shadowing at the right time. We've done the same with wheat and barley, etc., the cereals and organics. So is this crop meeting expectation? We've heard comments today. Yes, some of it did, some of it didn't. We've got to share and develop those technologies. Hemp cake. So that's the hemp cake. It's the result of pressing the oil out. Now, I said earlier I'm into the whole food. Oil, I hate oily foods. So taking that byproduct of oil out of the hemp seed's a really good idea, because then I can eat the hemp cake. Too hard to eat the hemp seed when it's, got all that oil in it and a hard shell on it. And we look at that, you can throw it into the blender. So you've got the back bowl is how it comes out of the press. The small bowl there with the chunks is just hand crushed, grate in the scrambled eggs, etc. And the other one's put in a coffee grinder or blender whiz for 30 seconds and you've got powder, 32% protein. Oh, here we are back to marketing again. Chicken. Let's read the fine print. Yellow peas, extra virgin olive oil. That's what it's made out of. There's no chicken in it. Chicken-free chicken. We've got a lot of this happening now in the market. This is marketing. Won't be long, we'll have hemp-free hemp. Watch out for those things. And so the main three things we're looking at there, just the seed and the oil, the purity of that, the packaging, the damage, etc., that light does versus no light. Have a look at some of those things and around the packaging. So this product, I've got a lot of people eating it because we're not allowed to feed it to animals. And so what we've got is bulk from the press, quick squeeze for those things, and 20 seconds in the whiz, and add it to anything you like because it is a whole food. The nutritional balance of it, the omegas, the beauty of the hemp seed cake. This is considered by most in the industry at the moment as a byproduct, a waste product. It has the omega oils in balance for the human digestive system. Absolutely brilliant. No wastage in our digestive tract. The other elements there, the fat, the trace elements, etc. And we've got to look at those things, the beneficials, but there's a whole lot more in there that we don't talk about. This lady's quite interesting. I had tea with her last night down in New Plymouth. She's 2.5 years into cancer, into chemo. She's had a couple of different belts at it, cracks at it. But all the way through, she's been on hemp cake on a daily basis, 2-3 times a day, virtually every meal. She's grinding through a salt grinder, bit of seed cake onto a feed, bit of crunch onto the salad, etc. She has taken some oil, some hemp seed oil capsules, as well as the chemo. The key thing is the hairdresser and the specialists can't believe that she's still getting her hair cut every 6 weeks. The treatment she's on, she should have no hair. She's the one that's got hair, but can she get the specialists to give the hemp cake to anyone else? Nah, that's witchcraft. It's our medicine that's doing it. You're just an exception to the rule with the hair thing. And so the real things I want you to think about at the end of this is these two aspects. The perception is reality in the marketplace. If people think that industrial hemp is wacky-backy, is nimbin, is all of those things, that's the image we've got to change. That's hard work. It's got to be constant work. That's why it's so important people talk about iHemp, M-hemp, or R-hemp. Industrial hemp, medical hemp, recreational hemp. Separate them out every chance you get so that people understand that they aren't the same product. And I'm not mixed, whoopsie, sorry. And the last one, let food be thy medicine and let medicine be thy food. And Hippocrates, the base of that was dietary is the cause of disease and the cure of disease. And that's why I'm involved in the organic sector. It's why I am really keen on the hemp product because it is a complete food. Where we have seen animals have access to it, man, they wolf it down because they know it's good tucker. Where we see wild birds come into a crop, you can lose a crop pretty quick and you can lose it before the machinery can harvest it, before it's lost some of the stickiness. So those are issues. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you tonight. The value part is about the integrity of the crop and the marketing and the story. And for me, that means you remove any ambiguity about it by being certified organic and growing on organic land. Keep that process pure because everybody is trying to get into that marketplace now. Everyone in the system is trying to do chickenless chicken, beefless beef. Hey, if it's beefless beef, call it mung burger, not beef burger without the beef. Let's get some of that straight talking as a country, because if we don't, the country won't go forward and certainly the industrial hemp industry won't, because we've got a lot of people don't want you replacing their existing income stream, and that's what will happen. So I might have taken more than my time frame, but thank you for that opportunity, and thank you guys wherever you are down the camera. And we'll see you again at one of the other events, maybe if you tune into that. So back over to Richard.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Bill. We've had some really good input there from the growing side, and Bill's taken us on a bit of a deep dive into that marketing aspect, because we do have a branding issue as far as the industrial hemp industry goes. And the NZHIA has looked at that as part of our work plan. And if we need some expert opinions in this space as well, but we do need to change the narrative. We need to really tell our story a lot better, because it is a very good story. It's full of sustainability. It's full of visions and values that people really enjoy about the products that they want to consume. So if they've made that connection to say, okay, as a raw material, this could really work, then there's hope for us to get into those industries, which will help us to scale the industry. And we'll talk about that now, because we've just got 4 more slides to go in this series, and then we'll have our just a quick Q&A to answer the questions from the audience. And if the online people would like to send something through, I'll try and check the chat as well. But from the point of view of the why hemp, as we discussed before when I was speaking, it was about the farming, the food, the fibre and the health. Now, we've heard some good stories about the farming and some horror stories about combines. And there are horror stories. I mean, there's, the case of a very dry day, binding with the fibre we heard about, the dust was created, a spark happened, and $250,000 combine burnt to the ground. Not a good day for the contractor. These things can happen, but there are ways that you can mitigate that. You can cover up those belts and all sorts of other approaches. But it's important that we as an industry sort of learn from each other, so we avoid some of those mistakes, because we don't have time to reinvent the wheel. We've got to actually move forward on this quite quickly, because it speaks to this perfect storm of the environment needs things in this climate crisis that we're facing. The consumer wants sustainable, more environmentally friendly products. Even the regulator wants to increase the export potential of New Zealand by some really high figures. And all of those things can be enhanced if we adopted a partly adopted industrial hemp partnership in us with the industry. But just on the farming side, we need to note also that there's reasons why you would farm without having to be orientated by just a cash crop. What we're talking about there, as Bill mentioned, is an accumulator. It's a bioaccumulator. This product can, in a very short growing period, produce 25 tonnes per hectare of wet weight. That's nearly 12 or 13 tonnes dry weight. Now, that's a massive amount of biomass. And they have done some studies where that biomass has been seen to lift heavy metals and really help clean and condition soil, break up compactation with its long taproot. We need to know more about how that fits in the New Zealand farming scene. We need more R&D on that aspect of the industry, because as a phytoremediation plant, this could have some real potential. We don't like wet feet. It's best to grow in a well-drained sandy loam, but we wouldn't be necessarily right on the waterways. Maybe mushrooms and mycosylum could be there, but we would be a little bit more inland, possibly in a dairy farming sense where nitrates are present, because we're a gross nitrogen feeder. Now, if that was to happen, this bioremediation could lead to all sorts of opportunities to clean and condition and revert soil that has been covered in chemicals back into productive food-grade land. So there's reasons that you could consider growing it just because it's good for the land. And then we need to understand how it fits in that farming rotation. What are the effects of follow-on crops? Is it better? Does it help with weed suppression? Is a good example. And there's whole conversations around how much seed that you require. And because James was growing a seed crop, maybe there was a less seeding rate than you might have as a fibre crop. So they might be more densely packed together, and you would grow, so your weed suppression may be more in a fibre crop in the sense that that canopy's been established in suppressing those weeds. But this is a whole series of things that we need to understand. And then we start talking about the harvesting, and we've already acknowledged some issues with the combines and things, but how do we harvest for the fibre crop, which has only just really started in New Zealand, and we'll get to that in the next slide. But from that farming point of view, you are looking at what you're going to be growing. Is it going to be a seed crop? Is it going to be a fibre crop? Is it going to be a dual crop, what they call a dual crop, which is harvesting for the seed, then coming through and sickle bar mowing the fibre down and using that as a fibre raw input? There's also the horticultural side of the industry, which is something that we haven't really explored because there's a regulatory hurdle there, but it needs to be acknowledged. Now, what we're talking in that sense is We don't want to pollinate the plant. So we're a wind-pollinated plant. So if we're growing horticulturally, we want to grow female-only plants. So you wouldn't want pollen in that environment. So that's an issue that may have to be confronted in certain areas. And you'll end up in New Zealand with the regional strengths of those areas determining what crops you're going to grow. For example, the biggest areas of cropping in the moment are in Canterbury and mid-Canterbury. Now, that's because that's where the grain belt is. They've got all the infrastructure, they've got a lot of machinery, they've got the know-how. That's why they grow really good grain. Now, with the climate crisis, things are getting hotter, so other places could grow the grain. As James has pointed out, it can grow in mid-Waikato. So it's not exclusive to some of these areas, but you are going to play to your strengths around what primary processing and infrastructure you've got. So in the Waikato area, you're probably looking at more of a fibre crop, in my opinion, because that's going to be something that is really going to step forward as being a commercial opportunity, but it's going to require a lot of investment. And we'll go through those food, fibre and health slides next. But it's important to know about those crop rotations. We've talked about the planting times being similar to maize and late November, December-ish, possibly even in early October or mid-October if you're growing for that seed crop down south, and then harvesting in that February, March area. In the case of canola, that's an auto-flowering plant, so that completes its cycle without being restricted by the movements of the sun and the daylight lengths that the plant is exposed to. But again, these regional variations of day length, heat units, they're all going to lead you to the right outcome about what sort of crop that you should be growing. So let's talk about the outputs of those crops. We'll start with the food industry. So obviously we're talking about the seed. The seed, which we described as being legal for human consumption since 2018, as a bit of history, the first application for ZANS at the time, which is Food Standards Australia and New Zealand, went in 1998. So it took nearly 20 years for us to get across the line for hemp seed as a food for humans. In that time, we were always feeding it to the animals. Now, what happened last year was that there was another application put to Food Standards Australia and New Zealand, and that was asking for the ability to sell the leaf, the flower, and the sprouts and the roots as a food for human consumption. So that's now opening up potentially another industry that we could look at for a food industry, not just based on the nutritional value of the seed and the seed oil. And as Bill was describing, some of those nutritional aspects whereby the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 is in the perfect ratio for human consumption. So there's an oil that was designed by nature to be really compatible with exactly what the human needs in those essential fatty acids. But it's also a great source of all the essential amino acids, and you've got some vitamins and things in there as well, which make it pretty much a superfood and a complete diet. So really there's some amazing aspects of the hemp seed, and it could really open up if that food law changes. It will take a year for them, after the application's been put in, for them to open the file, and then it'll take another period of consultation, and it shouldn't take 20 years because that reefer madness part of the food ministers is already gone. The food ministers now know that it's safe and it's been acknowledged as safe, so the path is there, but it could still take some time, and that process can be sped up if industry got together and put some money in towards it. It's surprising how quickly you can get government departments to work if you gave them $150,000 for a food application. But still, it will ultimately make its way forward. So those are the aspects of the food industry that are appearing. We've already discussed what the seed can be used for in the sense of oil and some of those byproducts. We'll probably talk about the animal issue when we do the Q&A, so I'll save that one for unpacking after these presentations are done. The fibre industry. It's been, for me personally, I've always been very interested in the fibre. When I do these presentations, I have sort of two looks. One is a suit, because I'm an accountant by trade, so fully suited. And the other one is fully hemp. So this is all hemp. So the shirt's hemp, jeans are hemp, socks are hemp, shoes are hemp, everything's hemp. And if we looked around the room and I asked you who's got a hemp garment in the wardrobe, at the moment, there's not too many of us that have that. but we will have a cotton one, we will have a woolen one. So eventually we'll all have a hemp one and we'll be really moving forward. And the reason why people were going to love this hemp, because they wear in, they don't wear out. Thermally, they're good, warm in the winter, cool in the summer. And so that's hemp as a fibre for an apparel project. If you're looking at scaling the industry, which is a major issue for any emerging industry, and the hemp is exactly the same situation. We have a sense of urgency because it can sequester carbon, so it's got to be a good thing to start growing. But if we all went out there and grow it, who would we sell it to? Where are the primary processes in that value chain? There's lots of gaps in there, and that's why we're doing this tour, to try and get those people from industry to have a light bulb moment and say, I'm an investor. I can see that the primary industry, the primary processing of the fibre needs some investment. I can see that there's a market for it, so now that's a bankable business plan. I'm going to invest in that space. Now, when that happens, we can start really scaling the industry. Now, how is that going to happen? It's very likely that hemp construction materials will allow us to scale the fibre industry. Now, you've probably heard of hemp creep. We've got a brick over there, and I encourage you to pick it up to see how light it is. I mean, this is a product that can be made from the hurd, which, as we discussed, was the inner woody pith of the stem, and be mixed in that chipped form with a lime solution and water, and it petrifies. So it goes from a vegetable state to a mineral state, 1/6 or 1/7 of the weight of concrete, doesn't require reinforcing, and can be poured in the shuttering around a wooden frame. And when that shuttering is removed, it's a monolith. So that's your interior insulation sorted and your exterior cladding sorted. And you've probably seen videos where the person with the blowtorch is holding it there for 5 or 10 minutes and there's just a black mark after that. I mean, this is really an amazing product. Thermally, again, you don't have to heat your building so much in the winter, and it cools in the summer, so you don't have to spend so much, on air conditioning and cooling. So that hempcrete, if that could get code marked and go through the process and become a building material that an architect can specify, then there's going to be a massive demand for hurd. That means there's going to be a need for primary processing, and a lot of people can be growing hemp to feed into that market. That will help us scale, because if we stay at a cottage industry, it's not really going to get to realise the opportunities and the potential that we really need industrial hemp to do. So if we can get that scale and manage it, because there's nothing worse than a business that turns around and says, okay, I'm going to now commit to using hemp as an ingredient or a raw material, and then the supply dries up. Well, no one can make a business plan without knowing the continuity of supply. And as you can imagine at the moment, if you've tried to buy jib recently, that's a great example of resilient supply chains going out the window at the moment. Well, we could be making hemp fibre boards. We can be making hemp insulation. So all of these things in the construction industry could be quite useful in helping us scale, because most of what I've just talked about from a fibre point of view are very low-tech uses of fibre. Now, if we looked into the high-tech uses, which Bill mentioned, a filament that you could do your 3D printing with, composites that we saw in the automotive industry, and okay, we don't have a great automotive industry, but we have a very established yachting industry, and there's coach builders, and there's loads of people redoing their kitchens that need cabinets and all that sort of thing. So there's all those composite and plastic type materials. You've got the paper that you could be using, again, a big producer though. But they're all leading us to these resilient supply chains and doing something about the climate, because it's locking up that CO2, especially in that hemp material. Now, that's a really exciting opportunity in the scaling of the fibre industry. So the reasons, as I've said, about naturally antibacterial, antifungal, antimicrobial, antistatic, these are great these are great qualities. As the hemp seed has great qualities in a nutritional sense, as a fibre, the strength of it, those qualities that we discussed really set it apart, and it's light. So the people making things with fiberglass, yes, possibly they lose some of their tensile strength, but they gain in making things so much lighter. So if we could start replacing carbon fibre, fiberglass, glass fibre and insulation, these are all going to lead to more sustainable and products that are going to be easier to use and install with. So it's quite exciting to do with the fibre side, and there's a lot of collaborations, of course, with other primary industries in the wool, in the forestry, as there is in the dairy, if we can get into that rotation with a dairy company or a dairy farmer, but also this food market for animals as well, which is a byproduct. The health industry. Now, when we were talking about the fibre, you would be harvesting those fibre plants at, a lot earlier than you would when you're harvesting the seed plants, because you're going to be looking at it and going, well, the males are shedding the pollen. Once the males shed the pollen, that's the best fibre from the male plant, so we'll whip them out, and we may as well just chop everything else down because it's still good-looking fibre. Because if you let it go to seed, it's going to have to build up a whole lot of strength in that stem, which is going to affect the quality of the fibre, but you need that strength to hold up the seed head. So if we looked at Waikato and said, right, quite a fibre industry, this next slide possibly doesn't fit too much against your regional capabilities and capacities because you're, set up for arable farming. But if we looked at the horticultural industry, sort of individual plant husbandry, we're looking at that health industry. Now, on the spectrum, if you're thinking about food, we would move from food to whole foods, to functional foods, to natural health products, to nutraceuticals, and then to medicine. So we've got to medicine, which is obviously at the extreme end of health. But as Bill's slide suggests, health starts with let food be thy medicine. So if we were eating well, we could reduce the pressure on our hospitals by just being a lot more healthy because we're living in hemp houses which don't have mold, we're eating hemp foods and we're wearing hemp clothes. So that's got to help relieve some of the pressure at the far end of the medical industry. Now, if you're making a medical claim, then it's got to have those clinical trials and all that sort of thing, which is where the medicinal cannabis scheme sits. So we don't have to make medical claims because we're not making medicines. But as you'll be aware, the health and wellness industry is massive. Now, of course, health and wellness, that includes medicine. We've got a medical cannabis scheme. There's lots of great people working in that space. They're going to be producing a whole lot of infrastructure that is going to be based on what they call GMP, good manufacturing practices. And we're hoping that some of that infrastructure could be used to contract process some of the products available in the health market from industrial hemp. The reason why we would like to use GMP facilities to produce that is some of the overseas jurisdictions that you're going to be sending these into. And as Bill was saying, we've got to be export. Sure, we can build an industry for New Zealand and we can be healthy. And because of their food and things like that, definitely the hempcrete, you're not going to ship that off overseas. But these value-add products have a massive export potential, and everything that we could produce could go into a niche market in one of these large American cities, the European cities as well. Now, we could just be feeding in to that niche market. And to get into some of those markets, they're going to want to, especially in the health and wellness part, they're going to want to know, how is your product being manufactured? And if we can say it's being manufactured by a GMP facility, well, clearly that's the highest of the high. But it's about that story, and we've got to tell our story well to get into those global niche markets. But in the case of health products, we've got another couple of hurdles as well, because as you'll be aware, THC is a controlled drug, which is under the Misuse of Drugs Act, and you've got CBD, which is now a prescription medicine, and that's under the Medicines Act. So those two, THC and CBD, are what we call cannabinoids, and there's a load of cannabinoids in this plant. But there's also a load of terpenes. There's a load of flavonoids. Now, admittedly, THC is hard to work in that space. We've got not much THC, so not really concerned for low THC industrial hemp. We've got plenty of CBD, so that's a bit of a shame that it's been caught up as a prescription medicine in the Medicines Act. But if we look at the 100 other cannabinoids, all these minor cannabinoids, all these flavonoids, all these terpenes, there's plenty we can start with. They're all very, very high value. We can start there and start working on this industry there. But if you mention extraction to the Ministry of Health, they're going to assume straight away that you're into medicine. Even though we could, we've got a license to process, we've got a license to cultivate. This is what's actually on a license. These are the authorised activities. So we would argue that processing could include cold pressing of oil, which you could call extraction. But if you did, the Ministry of Health would immediately put you into that medicinal category. So we've got this issue about interpretation of the regulations. It's really their interpretation isn't enabling our industry, and that's what we've got to change. We've got to rewind some of this regulatory creep that's been happening because of the way they're interpreting the regulations. When they tell us that it's not our role to interpret the regulations, and then they go ahead and interpret the regulations. So it's a problem for the industry, but this health part of the equation is massive. Now, we're talking about that female plant as well. So we've eliminated the issues around pollen, and we're looking at growing those plants and harvesting those female heads and flowers and leaves that have these cannabinoids, terpenes, and flavonoids. Now, you should also be aware of why those cannabinoids are important, and I think you probably all know about the endocannabinoid system, which is an internal system that was discovered in the mid-90s, which was quite a revelation, really, because, the doctors knew about other systems that we've got, the nervous system, the circulatory system, the breathing system, they knew about all of those things, but they didn't know about this endocannabinoid system, whether it's CB1 and CB2 receptors, where these cannabinoids that are made in the human body, hence the name internal. So these cannabinoids are produced by us, and most things with the backbone would produce cannabinoids. But in this day and age, with stress and toxicity and all sorts of things that are going on, we need to supplement that from time to time, and that's where you're using industrial hemp, and there's and cannabis in general, hemp in general, but there's other plants as well that could produce these cannabinoids. But it's really interesting to know that there's a system in our body that needs these cannabinoids that a plant like hemp can produce. So I won't take you on too much of a deep dive there, because you're probably already aware of some of the things we've been talking about here, but it is important to know why these things work in that health space. So it's a great opportunity, definitely for the export. The reason why this is really relevant is that you could get into this space pretty quickly. It's not like a fibre industry requiring a decortication step. It's not like a seed industry. You could do this quite quickly at a low capital rate. So that's why it has a role to play in this emerging industry. Now, so thank you. That's the end of those presentations. We've just got a couple of slides of housekeeping to do, and then we'll get back to that Q&A. So the next steps. So as I say, joining the Industries Association would be a great one, because then we could keep in touch with you, and we could let you know what we've been working on, which is this strategy reset, which is speaking to what we've been talking about. It includes branding. It includes this government lobbying around the health industry, around climate change, around lots of those aspects. But it's also about building that capability development as well. So SFFF and other funding people are really there for industries that can move the needle on the climate crisis, on environmental issues, on export potential, on regional job creation and creating opportunities for investment in the regions. As you've heard tonight, industrial health fits that in quite a significant way in the sense of a good news story. So we are working on our work plan in that space. We do have a meeting coming up with MPI. We have a regular grouping of all the government officials in our industrial hemp liaison group meeting that hasn't sat for a couple of, because of COVID, for nearly 18 months now, but that's going to be restarted, where we can raise some of these issues, the regulatory creep that we speak of. I could give you a list of examples, but let's not get bogged down in that. This slide also contains two links. One is the Callaghan Innovation, because they've done some roadmaps which explains the value chain for the fibre industry, the seed industry, and the medicinal industry. And Tupuni Korkori on their Tupu NZ fact sheets for industrial hemp. There's a lot of information there about some of the economics of it, especially growing on Māori trust land as well. The big emblem there will be the reason why we get in touch with you again after this event and after the tour is finished, because we've got Aotearoa New Zealand Hemp portal, which will be using these presentations, and we'll be slicing and dicing them and putting them in the portal so people's journey in the hemp industry can be sped up. So if you're interested in fibre, you can log on to the portal, you can type in fibre, and then you might be interested in biochar. So then you go to Jim Jones from Massey University, who is going to present later in the month on the topic of biochar, and you can find some information. So you'll be finding Bill's information, James's information, and all the other speakers. So that portal will be really useful for helping us to generate that community. And if we do it well as an emerging industry, we could really try and harness that collaboration, that sense of cooperation where, like the wine industry, they've got a good example of it. You know, there's a lot of wine companies out there competing with each other, but when they enter the world stage, they do it together. They have very high standards, and they're all winners out of that. Because, you know, to be thinking about protecting your little spot in a small pie when we could be raising the tide that lifts all the boats, surely it would be better to be working together in some of those aspects. And right about now is the time to be thinking about that pre-competitive, this foundation knowledge that we're all going to benefit from, which will allow us to then apply the knowledge and really take a deep dive into the areas that interest you. And that's why some of these presentations, the people in the audience are going to have that light bulb moment, and they're going to say, man, I need that in my building material. I need that in my filter. I need that in my plate. I need that as an ingredient in the food that I want to make. And they're the ones that are going to create that demand pool. So that collaboration is a real aspect, and you'll hear people talking about it. You'll also hear people talking about the chicken and egg, which is always a frustrating conversation to have, because how can we get to the scale? How can we get into that industry when we don't have the scale? How can we grow when there's no process? And we're right in the middle of that. How can we get over these regulatory barriers and hurdles when these people in Wellington don't really understand that we're farmers, not farmer, because they work for the Ministry of Health? But as I say to people, in 4 or 5 years, maybe a little bit shorter, or could be a little bit longer, you know, we'll look back and say, what was all the fuss about? And we'll be away. And I hope you enjoy that trip, and I hope you come along for the ride into this new industry. So we've just got a couple of thank yous as well. Moana Farms, thank you, James. Bill from OrganicAg. And we've got a big thank you for the South Waikato District Council, and particularly Space to Grow. Now, Paul wasn't able to come tonight and present on behalf of the South Waikato District Council. I think it might be a flu type thing going on. But they were kind enough to help us promote the evening. They provided the venue for this evening, so we're very thankful for saving our budget on that so we can spend it on advertising for future events. But even better, they were kind enough to provide some food and drinks for this evening. So we really are grateful for the support that we've had and the working relationship we continue to grow with the South Waikato Council. So that was a great opportunity to thank them. And, of course, our major sponsors for the whole event. We couldn't have done it without AgMart. They've been a fantastic supporter of emerging industries in New Zealand, particularly the hemp industry. And our spot prize sponsor, which was Hemp NZ tonight. Final call out for the get involved and join. You know, we're really passionate about bringing this to the the New Zealand public, to try and educate them about why they should be supporting the industry by buying hemp products and eating hemp and wearing hemp and things like that, but equally to the farmers as well, those 4 areas: the farming, the food, the fibre and the health. Right. Well done, folks. You made it all the way through the slideshow. Thank you very much. Right. Right, folks, is there anything that you would like to sort of take a deep dive into? There's a start. Yeah. We'll leave it to you.
Where are we at in terms of being able to feed to animals? Is there any work being done to overchange that laws? Or
I think that you guys might have something to add. But so the question was, and I just have to repeat the question, because if you'd like to come up and ask a question, it'll be picked up on the mic. But for the people that are watching online, the question related to, is there any work being done on the situation about feeding to animals? And the short answer is industry needs to get involved. You know, if you want to send them an application to get a product registered with the ACVM, because that'll bring it to a head. But if I just take you on a little bit of a deep dive into the background. So when in 2018 we were allowed hemp for human consumption, we were in a meeting with the people from MPI, particularly the people from the ACVM, which is Agricultural Compounds and Veterinary Medicines. And they explained at that time, you've lost access to animal foods. And so obviously, you know, we were a bit concerned about that because we were just on the height of celebrating that we've just been having, you know, the ability to sell it for human foods. But it transpires that there was a perceived risk of CBD or THC metabolites remaining in milk and meat products in sensitive export markets. So what that boils down to is Saudi Arabia might turn around and say, hey, we heard that these cows were being fed hemp or being, you know, we're in the vicinity of a field of hemp, and we're worried that that THC, which, you know, is not going to be an issue in low THC industrial hemp, or CBD, the prescription medicine, is going to remain in that milk and meat product. So that perceived risk was enough for them to shut us completely down. And the thing about that is that it covers both companion and production animals. So that's quite a major. And really it comes down to an argument about, it comes down to the single molecule argument. So in the food code, when that was revised to accommodate hemp seed as a human food, they put in some tolerances that allowed you to go up to this level of THC and this level of CBD. Now, those same tolerances aren't in the MPI's Agricultural Compounds Veterinary Medicines Act. So because there's no tolerance, there's no levels that are acceptable, the only level that is acceptable is 0. And we can't do a test to say that there's 0 in there. We can do a test at some really, you know, scientific ways to say that it's not detected. But because that not detect is not 0, the answer is no, you can't do it. So, you know, we need to work with them to soften that approach. There's the poultry school at Massey University are working on trying to get permission to do a study on how the nutritional feed for chickens, how effective the hemp seed byproducts would be for feeding the chickens, because they know once this law changes around feeding it to animals, that the big chicken people will want that piece of information. So there's things that we can do so we're not wasting time completely. But from a, you know, companion versus production animal point of view, if you've got a product that you think would be a useful product to register for a companion animal, send off the $185, fill out the application, send it off to them, because they haven't got any applications. And because they haven't got any applications, when Damien O'Connor turns around and says, oh, you know, ACVM, well, how many people from the hemp industry have applied? And they say none. And then they say, well, what's all the fuss about? Carry on. You know, so we've got to move that needle, and it's a major one, because although Bill's, you know, working on, and others are working on, you know, finding high value markets for these byproducts, that animal industry is still an important one, you know, to feed back into, and also for the health of the animals. I mean, you know, we need to be part of that. Again, in 10 years' time, we're going to have a CBD fortified milk, I'm not sure. But if you guys got something to add to the food?
I don't really have anything to add on the regulatory side of things, but yeah, obviously it'll be a game changer for farming systems like ours, you know, dairy and chicken beef, and the way that we can manage things. And, you know, to Bill's points about reducing the use of sprays and that sort of thing, when we can control residue using our animals, and incorporating cropping with livestock farming is the ultimate. But unfortunately, we can't do that, and we've got to keep everything separate on our farm. So that makes things a bit tricky.
And Can I move for that, Tom?
Yep.
Right, so, no, down, because
Okay.
I can't see the audience.
Right.
So there's a couple of bits to it, and the last bit that James, that's better, that James just raised about the management of sprouting plants afterwards is a slightly different one to my main area of concern. And the byproducts, as they're called, well, from where I sit, the oil is the byproduct. The seed cake is the main product. That is the food without the complication of being too oily. And that at the moment is being turned to the powder, to the flours, and sold as a 32% protein product at about $50 a kilo. If they separate it out with the machinery and take it up to the 70% protein, it's selling for $80 a kilo. Nobody in the animal production industry is going to pay you that money. You can buy chook feed in the supermarket for $1.24 a kilo. Who's going to pay $20, $30, $40 a kilo for hemp unless it's got weevil in it or something else? Well, then it's a byproduct. So let's focus first and foremost on the value proposition. And the value proposition is that every bag of muesli sold in this country, every loaf of bread, we've put it into sausages and meatballs when we get our beasts killed. 10% hemp cake in there. And we've got a flexitarian sausage, keeping up with the Joneses in Auckland or the yuppies. So be aware that it's a food for human consumption. And the easy out is to take the waste stream aspect. Now, I don't know, James might not be quite old enough to go back to when you could pick up a lump of palm kernel and squeeze the oil out of it. The machinery in the palm extraction, the oil extraction's got better, and now it's dry sawdust compared with what it used to be because it's a waste stream. They haven't found a more valuable use for it, so they dump it into animal production. Hemp cake is far too valuable for that. Where we have a real issue is with the sprouting and the regrowth in the paddock after, because our animals shouldn't eat that. And there are some very serious trading issues with it. And at one of the liaison meetings with MPI, we had the lead international negotiator from MPI, not just ACVM. What the hell's he doing in the meeting? Well, he was there to tell us about a product that had been exported from New Zealand with hemp in it to a foreign destination. And man, he had to get on the phone when it became apparent that product was in there, because it's mandatory jail sentence for anyone receiving hemp-based products as even a pet food in that destination market. So we don't want to put, as an exporting nation, I, as a farmer, do not want to put our agricultural exports at risk. I don't want the United States or Europe or whoever we're exporting to, some of our Asian markets, ringing up the ministry in New Zealand and saying, you might as well have foot and mouth, guys, we've just cut off all exports out of New Zealand because somebody put their herd of cows into a paddock of hemp, regrowth, and a tourist took a photo of it and we've got the evidence. We're now in a connected world. Let's be real. If someone says thou shalt not, let's not do it. Let's think we're clever and we're isolated down here in the bottom of the Pacific. So I do take it very seriously, very seriously. It's got a huge potential as human food. And that is where our biggest expenditure is going now and into the future. Ill health, not the health industry. It's the ill health industry that's costing us. And so whole food and good food, if we have it available for animals, hey, that's easy. It's a waste product. Let's get rid of it. We don't have to think. So just think about that part of it. How do we get that active?
And so the high value seed, or the seed products, as Paul says, it doesn't make sense to, you're not going to compete with palm kernel expeller,
No.
in that sense. But there are markets definitely for domestic animals, though, and I mean it's the same as the health market for humans for some of these products as well. So those are big industries that can be looked at. And again, in farming rotation, it does make sense to have hooved animals walking through the paddock after an arable crop's been in. And so there's lots to be said in this space, but it's not. That gentleman that came to that meeting, one of the industrial hemp liaison group meetings, he really did explain about the perceived risk, because it's not just perceived, it's actual if you had a problem with that.
Is there any issue with post-harvest biomass being turned back into the ground and then grassing? Is there any issue there? No.
Not from your hemp license point of view. Mulching and composting is allowable for your crop disposal.
And regrass and graze straight away.
And did you guys have seeds come up afterwards, abandoned sort of plants?
Careful.
Okay, maybe we shouldn't do
it. But we made sure that we sort of incorporated everything back into the soil. That's a risk, and we just had to manage it.
It might not be the question you're actually asking, but the incorporation of that trash, one of the very early crops we did up at Tiara, a guy did 5-acre paddock, and because of the cultivation gear he had a massive problem trying to work it back in. So what he did at the end of the day was put the buck brake on and pushed it to the end of the paddock, and he had these mountains of fibre at the end of the paddocks because he couldn't get his seed drill to work in the paddock because of the strength of the fibre, top going around the rotors and things like that. So there are some of those issues, but that comes down to how you manage it. And you saw in James's slide that he was using I love the term you used.
I'm not actually too sure what the technical term for is it,
silerator, but your term is much better.
Suck and chuck.
Yeah, suck and chuck. That's a great term because it isn't in there long enough to bind around. But if you incorporate it in the soil, if you oversow, and then put a mob of animals into it, you haven't got a problem. You're trampling the seed in. So
that was probably the most effective for us in terms of mitigating that risk of animals getting involved, as we could deal with it with the incinerator and get it out of the paddock, which was good, and then it made a good sort of compost heap.
So the question for the online viewers was about the residue of the crop after harvest, what to do. And the people down south, they still burn it from time to time? Yeah,
we've got people burning, and this is one of the ridiculous things that we've always had to deal with in the organic sector. There's a rule in organic regulations internationally and organic concept that you don't have fires on organic properties. It's a special occasion to have a fire, especially in an arable cropping. And that's if you've got a severe disease or whatever. And people think, it's an environmental thing, it's saving pollution in the atmosphere. Hey, we've harvested carbon from the atmosphere to put into the soil. Why would we put a match to it and put it back in the atmosphere? We need the carbon in the soil. And that's why we don't want to see these crops burned and put back in the atmosphere. So we've got to harvest it again, because it's the hemp particularly is a very high value food source for the microorganisms, the diversity of the soil food web. And so we talk about how many generations of microorganisms are going to survive, have societal life in the breakdown process of the fibres. And that's huge because it gives them structure, it gives them somewhere to live and drainage and everything else, and it holds our soil some tremendous product to incorporate. And so if we oversow, we grow a crop on top of that, the cow manure going on top of that over time, all helps with that cycle. So it's a really valuable product.
So how well did the compost go when you composted your leftover?
Sorry, Jody. Yeah. So the question was, how well did the compost go in the leftover stubble and things from the harvested post-harvested crop?
Depending on how you measure success, but for us, it was trying to get rid of a whole lot of biomass that we just couldn't deal with. and it composted to nothing very quickly. So I'm not an expert in these sort of areas, but Bill, you could talk to.
With something else?
We
just mounded it.
We did mix it into the soil in some areas. In some areas, we just had to mound it because we just had so much of it, and we needed to get it somewhere else other than within our grazing system. And yeah, so obviously being pretty careful where we put it, so we stick within our licensing barriers.
So when we're composting, we look at soft and hard carbons and the hemp and nitrogens, but the hemp plant has sufficient soft and hard carbons to provide the diversity of food sources for both fungi and bacteria, and we can get quite a quick breakdown of even the hard fibres. Okay, so on its own,
yeah.
If you want to speed it up or achieve a different objective, then you can start mixing in, on a dairy farm, your effluent pond, you can mix in the fish fertilisers, the things that are going to be activators. You might mix in a bit of molasses. But on its own, there is sufficient there because it's not like a dry straw where you haven't got a pith in the middle. This has got a lot of soft carbons in it, which is tremendous food, because if it's got moisture, it's good. And when we take it into things like the hemp creek, the moisture's gone and boom, it's there for a long term. So it's a tremendous product.
So on the flip side of that then, is there anybody collecting the herd for making hemp creek and the fibre for hemp creek in New Zealand, or is it all just Australia?
So the question there is, are we producing herd and fibre in New Zealand? Just to paraphrase it. Well, actually, in 2021, the joint venture between Hemp NZ, who Bill's mentioned, who've been involved in the hemp industry for a number of years, and an agricultural company from Ashburton called Carfields, they got together because they were looking at what they could do at one of the Carfields companies called CP Wool. There was manufacturing in New Zealand. They had a lot of spare room. Should we keep it going? Should we not? And Dave Jordan introduced them to the idea of hemp. And they took it a step further and actually brought in a decortication process, a production line. And that was a Tantham decortication line out of England. And of course, COVID hit, so it was on the water, got delayed. They couldn't get the engineers from England to come out and commission the whole thing. So they managed to get it working, and they started producing or processing hemp stems from that Canterbury region at the end of last year. So now they're supplying herd to the small number of builders in New Zealand. And they're busy because there's a lot of people that wanted to use herd in their construction materials but didn't want to import it because it just didn't make sense to them from a carbon miles point of view. So now you can get herd in New Zealand, and of course the wonderful thing about that is the byproduct in that case is this useful bast fibre, which there's an example of a geotextile, a mulch mat, and that's a lot of where it's going at the moment in another location. Use. But now that they're underway, they're getting a lot of interest from the universities and industries about that hemp fibre, because we haven't had hemp fibre at scale, admittedly, only one factory in one area in New Zealand, but it is happening. So, and I think they've got pretty big ambitions and plans to replicate that round into other areas and really move it forward, because you must have that processing machinery close to where you're growing it. Your transport costs would kill you otherwise.
Especially today. But the other part of that is that for that product, it's always been an opportunity and has been exercised by many people to either reincorporate it on the farm or to sell it at very high value to home gardeners or horticulturalists. You know what they pay for pea bales, pea straw. Hemp fibre bales, leave that for dead. What it does by putting a just a layer on top of your soil surface over the winter, that breakdown, the growth you get out of that. So there's a huge market in that home gardener field as well. But if you're doing it at farm level, unless you really need the cash, put it back in the soil, because then you grow a far better crop next year. That's the nitrogen cycle that we're looking for without having to buy it.
And one of the more traditional uses overseas for the herd as well is that horse bedding, speaking to that absorbency that the material has. Right. I'm glad we had a good deep dive on that agricultural compounds veterinary medicine one. I think that's going to be an important one to mix into the slicing and dicing of the videos. So
one more quick question. Is there anyone that in New Zealand that's sort of like a agronomist for hemp, surrounding cultivars or what to grow where, or selecting cultivars, is there?
Okay, so the question relates to the skill set around agronomy and support for the industry and growers. Is there any experts in that field? My observation is it's so new. 90 years of prohibition means hardly, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And so there's probably not too many experts. The Midlands people have been growing since the trials began. This is another large agricultural company down in Ashburton. They've been involved since 2000. So Jo Townsend, who will be speaking at our Christchurch meeting, is very, very knowledgeable. She speaks at the Australian Hemp Conference, our industrial hemp summits. So she's got a lot of experience, but a lot of that would go to supporting the Midlands contract growers to supply their seed for the new hemisphere oil brands and things like that. But they also do multiply seed for the Northern Hemisphere hemp companies as well, because of course we're on the opposite cycle, so that speeds up their breeding processes. There's some hemp breeders, Matt McIntosh, who started the New Zealand Hemp Industries Association, and he retired 2 or 3 years ago now. He's down in Southland. He has a company, Hempseed Holdings, and they have 5 approved varieties on the authorised list that the Ministry of Health keep of varieties that you're allowed to grow under a general licence. And there's pockets of other expertise. Most of the companies that have contracted growers would be able to provide you with the direction and support you going through that. We're hoping Farmlands have been a member of the association for quite some time, and they have a lot of agronomists in their organisation that support their 7,000 odd stakeholders. So we're hoping that we can introduce them and get them out on visiting some crops over the summer season as we try and make the use of the milestones every year, try and make use of the growing season. So it's starting to expand. People like Bill have quite a pedigree in giving expert advice as well. So there are some people out there that have done it, but as James was saying, a lot of it's about getting on the phone and talking to contractors and hearing the horror stories and not getting put off.
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one as well. I'll jump in on most things, as you might have noticed. I got a phone call one night a few years ago from a farmer, and he had just been given the expert advice by the contracted to a hemp company, and he had got hold of the agronomist and he had said, look, my crop's a bit yellowing. Yeah, I'm a bit worried about it. It's in a stunt stage. Now, this guy had just returned from a trip to Europe, this agronomist, paid for to understand the importance of no urea or minimal urea, of going down the biological, the organic path in the cycle. The first thing this guy said, yellowing, that's nitrogen deficiency, throw some urea on it. And the cocky rang me and he says, I don't really want to do that. That's not what I signed into. I thought this was going to be a clean crop. What do you reckon, Bill? The guy's given me, someone else had given him my name. I said, well, where you are, I keep an eye on the weather forecast. You've had about a fortnight of dull weather. And at this stage, the teenage stage of the plant, that's quite critical. If you're willing to wait for a few days and get 3 days of sunshine, it'll probably come right. But there's fish fertiliser, there's other nitrogen forms, there's lots of things we can do. But the sunshine, and we all know as pastoral farmers, we get 3 weeks or 3 days of dull weather, the grass doesn't have the guts in it, neither will the hemp. So this is fairly important, that direct to you, direct to a farmer, the very best money you can spend is not on an expert. It is getting off your backside, it is getting in the car, not onto the telephone, and it is going and seeing James and paying him $300 or $500 or a dozen a piss and spend a half a dozen, well, I know the character, okay, and you might get some cookies at his place if his good lady's home, and spend some time, but respect the experience he's had. Go and see John Ridd down in the Hawke's Bay, in the Manawatu, that's done 2,000 acres of cropping year after year after year and is doing industrial hemp. What varieties, what were your issues? Because it isn't just about soil science, it's about who's buying it, what was the problem, what was the linkage, which contractor, which dryer helped you, where's your market? You grow a brilliant crop because the guy says, put all this fertiliser on it. Where's your market? It all links together. And so spend, if you're looking at this coming spring, planting some hemp, any of you, but you've asked the question, between now and then, over the winter months, and preferably there's a heap of guys involved in the industry, go and visit them. Touch base, sit down and have a beer with them. Look at the machinery. Listen to the horror story of the machine burning down, of a $20,000 bearing pop because someone wasn't listening to the noises in the back of the machine. Those things are the important stories, and that experience, that big tall crop I showed you, he's your best agronomist for that. That was growing because he was told not to use soluble fertilisers and chemicals. He grew a winter graze crop, dairy cow winter crop. He break fed that. That became the nitrogen and carbon base for the fertiliser. And what a crop he had. And then it went back into the a grazable crop after that. But, you know, it's getting that long rotation, not having a rotation out of the back of a truck or a bag. You'll get that from a farmer. You won't get it from a salesman, because a salesman has to sell you something to put dinner on his plate that night. Put your money on the table, invest. What's it worth to you? $5,000 to have a 2-week trip around New Zealand? James said something very important before on this very topic. What was it? Any idea? Back to you guys. He went to Melbourne.
Oh, yeah, he did.
He didn't sit on his ass at home and get on the phone. He jumped on a plane. I dare say he took the good lady.
Absolutely.
That was the expensive part. I hope she's not listening. He took his farming team, his business team, to another country to talk to the people that have been there and done that. Not to the guy that was going to sell him some product out of a bag. That is investment in your future. John Ridd down in Manawatu, he had a problem with the volume he was doing and getting the drying done. So I don't know that he went to England, but he certainly imported product out of foreign markets, including England, the UK, and he set up a dryer, a grain dryer on his farm because of the very problem you said. 2 hours, you're putting aeration in the bottom of the truck. Hey, this is a major problem. I spend months growing a crop, no matter how good the agronomist is, and then it goes off because the truck had a flat tyre on the way to the dryer. That's how simple this is. When we did Tamaranui, I was driving overnight at end of harvest from Tamaranui or Tapawahini Road Valley down to Linton to get it there. And as soon as I got there, whatever hour it was, they would start drying, Palmerston North. Now, those are the things you need to know.
I'd just like to support that comment, and Bill, is that a lot of agriculture in New Zealand or in the Waikato at the moment, especially around cropping, is done by contractors, and you can pretty much pick up the phone and say, going to grow probably maize, and you probably don't have to get off the kitchen seat to do it. Like, it's right, the growers will turn up, FERC company gets involved, seed company, who's your contractor, find your buyer, all done. And hemp's, completely different to that. It's got to be all done by the farmer, and you've got to, it's not rocket science, it's just sort of getting ahead of it and getting a.
So if we planted a crop this spring, who's around to buy it? So where did you, like, if it's seed, you had a buyer?
Yes, yeah.
If it's fibre or who buys that?
So the question is from the audience, who's the buyer, whether it be seed or fibre?
So we've supplied 2 companies across our 2 seasons. So Carfields in the first season.
Where are they? So
they're a company based out of Ashburton, but they have North Island interests as well. And then Hemp Connect we supplied in the last season we grew. And so they're for seed, for food. Yeah. And so they're based out of Wanganui now, live in, and they've got a great setup and produce a high quality product, and have a lot of things that they like their growers to manage, especially within that drying process, to make sure you get that right to retain the quality of that product. Now the fibre one in the North Island, not so easy to sell. We, as I mentioned, with our cleaner fibre, the best that we could do at this stage was around animal bedding, and that was more trials to see how it went. It went well, but we haven't established a market or it's there's definitely desire out there for it. But
calf sheds.
What's that?
Bedding.
And sheep milking barns and goat milking barns. Yeah.
Trying in dairy now. Like calf dairy?
No.
That's the herd.
Yeah.
But what about the fibre?
No.
Nothing.
No.
Christchurch?
We tried, but it's just the transport costs to get it down there over the ferry. Just negates any. It's just not worth it. So maybe one day if there's a decorticator in the North Island, that'll be the way to go. From a sustainability point of view, I think to get around, the weed issues and that sort of thing in the Waikato, that'll be a goer.
A fibre crop.
Yeah, I think so. Like in terms, but we narrowed it down to the right cultivar to get into that kind of Goldilocks height, and where we were beating the weeds, but it wasn't too high for our harvester. So if you can crack that, that's all good. Or you might have a more expensive harvester that can process it better. But what we've found is that actually the older gear has worked really well for us, and it's easy to fix, and you do manage the machine by the sounds almost. You know what's going on, you know when to stop. Sometimes an alarm doesn't tell you soon enough.
So some of this, as we've said, is developmental still, and that's hugely important for people to understand. The fact that the Massey University guy on biochar is speaking is really important, because what we're looking at in the entire electricity generation in industry in New Zealand, Fonterra, pet food manufacture, all sorts are going away from coal and gas to solid fuel. They are going very rapidly into wood pellets and into burnables. Now, the immediate, easy option is that the hemp fibres, if we haven't got a ready market there, they are as a dry unit, they are a good burner. There is heat units there. So they can go en masse as part of that process. They could be going into the wood pellet, the fire pellets that are made. They could be blended into make the pine go further and that create a higher temperature in furnacing. They can make good biochar. So those are things that we're still establishing. The only problem is chicken and egg. Have we got the fibre to do it? No. Have we got well, I'm not setting up the industry until there's the fibre. Well, I'm not setting up the fibre until there's the industry. We've all got to take a risk in this intermediate part. And that's where someone like South Waikato District Council may say, okay, we're going to help with that, or regional council, because part of the economic return, and one of the problems we have so often with value is that we talk about value in dollar terms. People know the price of everything or the cost of everything and the value of nothing, whichever way you want to word that, but it's the price of everything and the value of nothing. Now, the value of the hemp is a rate rebate from Waikato Regional Council if you turn it into the soil because you've suddenly lifted your carbon. How about we start looking at those other value chains? And Richard, you touched on that in your presentation. So don't be hamstrung that, oh, there's nobody just to buy it. We've got to start thinking, and that's why you needed to be involved in the organisation to bring that to the debate table.
Because it's a very...
with Fonterra's already installed the pellet burning boilers. They got one at Murder.
Yep.
So they grew a lot of hemp down around Canterbury side too. I don't know what they've done with it all. Do you know what they've done with it all?
No.
But it's the same too. Kinleaf was burning. They've got their wood burner, the cogen plant that we're cutting all the stumps and chipped up stumps, and they're putting it through there, and then and that was going to the national grid. But they also had a paddock of big high stuff. I don't know what it was, just out by the mill, and they were trials driving that as well.
There's all sorts of things internationally to be done. Through the UK, particularly up in Scotland, they go in with a combine harvester or a sugarcane harvester, it almost is, and they harvest on an annual basis poplar and willow poles that are inch in diameter, cut them into 6-inch lengths, and that goes into furnaces as feedstock. So we've got all sorts of things. People are using Mycanthus grasses as feedstock for furnaces. And so there's all these sorts of things, and we can use hemp in the intermediate as that. So there's lots of options.
And that sort of high volume option, of using as a fuel would mean that you can help manage that scale, because now there are people excited about doing it. And as a fuel, the British thermal units is very high. It has less ash than a lot of other products. So it again has some qualities inherently in hemp that make it useful in that space. I would, from a purist sort of point of view, it's like, crikey, we're using this great fibre and this great herd and we're going to burn it. But it could help us get to that scale whereby, that industry is up and running, but now we've got, some fibre going into this industry and these things, because, industries, why hasn't the German automotive or the European automotive industry really picked up in hemp until they're just starting to now? Well, it was a supply issue. The hemp industry worldwide couldn't get them enough fibre that they needed for their door panels, but they're getting there, so that market's opening up. Now, if it took a fuel industry or a hempcrete industry to get us to that level, then there's some things we can do, because some of this wouldn't require a decortication. It just requires harvesting and then, maybe pelletizing or whatever to get it into that fuel mix. But that could be something while we're working on it, because if you look at Scion, which does a lot of work in forestry in Rotorua, they're very interested in hemp and particularly fibre, and they're looking at it as a biorefinery. So if you can imagine, we take fossil fuels and we crack out all those chemicals at various stages, we could be doing that with cellulose biomaterial, agricultural waste or even food waste in Hawke's Bay and things like that. So if we started to look, and those are massive, at scale, they're big employers, they're a big work site, they're Fonterra sort of large industry. So, all sorts of things, but how do we get to a biorefinery? Well, we probably have to make one at a cottage industry scale. and then overcome this chicken and egg scenario.
And so for harvest of some of that, and some of this stuff, if you are interested, it is commitment of your time. Go on YouTube and look at some of the harvesting and the multi-layered sickle bars or hedge cutters, because they're double action sickle, not against the anvil, harvesting directly into trailer for manufacturing for the extraction process. So they're harvesting a 6 to 8 inch length, and they're whistling around the paddock, and there's no jamming because it's the double sickle bar, cutting it, dropping onto a platform that goes straight into the bin. Okay, so just the same as sugar cane. And then it goes off. So if we were selling it for fuel on that basis, even after we've taken the heads off with the header, you can go through with that type of machinery and harvest it really simply for an end purpose. Okay, without any rotary parts, because that's where the fibre loves, is anything going round and round, that fibre loves grabbing hold and pushing the bearings apart. So there's options. And I know everyone only wants answers, but we ain't at that stage in an industry. That's the excitement of this industry.
Yeah, it really is. Well, folks, that's actually taken us up to nearly 10 o'clock, which is the time that we have to sort of start thinking about leaving the building. But is there any final questions that you had, or are we able to call it a day there, ladies and gentlemen? We'll be around while we're packing up as well, so we can carry on chatting about things.
And don't forget to take your bag of hemp cake home.
Hemp cake, very important. And then eat it as well.
There's 6 people here, and there's 6 bags.
Awesome.
Sorry, James, you've got grab a bag quick.
Thank you very much for coming out this evening. Thank you for joining us online, and we look forward to our next meeting, which will be in Thames on Tuesday. So if there's anybody in your network that's living in that Hauraki Coromandel area, please let them know that we'll be at the War Memorial Hall in Thames on Tuesday evening. But thank you very much for coming out, everybody, at Tokoroa. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you.